Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. We are fueled by Gatorade on this Monday. I'm Dave Revson. Great to have you with us. Got those stories we talked about off the top, plus some lacrosse, track, rowing. Lots to get into in the next hour. But we do start you with the sport that's going to take over the network this week in a really good way. That is baseball. That's our big story. After the dust settled on the weekend, Oregon and UCLA split the Big Ten title. Ducks got the number 1 seed. They swept Iowa, started the weekend in first place. The Hawkeyes did. First conference title for the Ducks since 1974. Bruins took 2 of 3 from Northwestern over the weekend to forge a tie for the title. First conference crown for them since 2019. And so now we head into the Big Ten tourney. And before we show you the bracket, we do want to explain the format because it's a bit different. The 12 teams are divided into 4 3-team pods. 1 team will advance out of each one of those pods. You play the other 2 head-to-head. If there is a tie for the best record, the higher seed gets the tiebreaker. And then once you have those 4 pool or pod winners, those teams will play a single elimination tournament the rest of the way. So with that out of the way, here is the bracket. The Ducks are the top seed because they won the season series from the Bruins 2-1. UCLA is the 2 seed. Iowa is seeded 3rd, and then USC 4th. The advantage of being the top seed is reflected in the other teams in your pool. No other team seeded higher than 8th for the top seeded Ducks. Big Ten Network analyst Jeff Lisey joins us now to break all of this down. Before we get into the specifics with the teams, Jeff, I want to talk about this pool play concept. It's different from how the women did it with softball. Do you like the way this is set up?
I do. I like the new format. You know, obviously you have the bigger conference this year. The conference tournament has expanded to 12 teams. And by doing the pools, you eliminate the need for someone working through a loser's bracket and having to play 6, 7 type games in a week, which can put stress on arms and make it almost dangerous for players. So again, you get through your pool, and there's 2 pool play games, and then from there it's just a semifinal and a final. So you can get hot, and anybody really could win it. The other thing I like is the top seeds in each pool, so 1 through 4. They have the advantage, right? If it ends in a tie break in their pool, they advance onto the semis. So it rewards the teams that play well during the regular season and have the better resumes. And, I think overall it's a good format.
Well, let's start with the team that played the best during the regular season, and by virtue of that, they are the number 1 seed. That is the Oregon Ducks. Man, they are red hot. They come in on a 10-game win streak. They're a team in really good position to host not just a regional, but perhaps even a super regional, or to come to that. Give us a sense of what you've seen from Oregon, particularly this past weekend when I know you saw them absolutely take it to Iowa.
Yeah, so I was fortunate. I was on the Oregon-Iowa series on Friday and Saturday, and Oregon is a special team. I mean, they are a true bona fide potential top 8 seed, almost for sure top 16 seed to host a regional. And this is a team that can make a run, right? You look at Oregon, and they swing it 1 through 9. They hit for average. They hit for power. We saw them. I mean, they'll do small ball and bunt and move runners over, and they can do everything. And then you look at them defensively across the infield. They have shortstops at 3rd, short, and 2nd. Jacob Clark at first base is a Gold Glove type player at first. So they play great defense, and then they pitch it as well, right? I mean, their starting pitching is really, really good. And this is an Oregon team, like I said, they are dangerous in Omaha here in the Big Ten tournament, and they're a team that's going to look to come back to Omaha again for the College World Series this year.
9-1 this year against Quad 1 teams, so they have proven certainly they can beat the best. That includes winning 2 of 3 against UCLA. The Bruins are the 2 seed, and really a great turnaround story. I mean, this is a historically very good program, but they have more than doubled their win total from last season. They had an off year last year, but man, they come in kind of clicking on all cylinders. How do you assess the Bruins as they head into this Big Ten tourney?
Yeah, UCLA, I mean, if you're looking for a team to challenge Oregon, UCLA could be that team. Rock Chalowski, I mean, All-American type player that could be the top pick in the draft. next year and is just a special player all the way around. And UCLA, again, that's another team. They can really swing the bats. They pitch it. They play defense. And they are another team that potentially could be in the running to host a regional, and a team that's built to make a run in the postseason. They're a good team.
Yeah, right on the cusp, you would think, just from kind of looking at RPI of being a regional host. They only have 3 Quad 1 wins this year, so if you get a chance to face Oregon and maybe reinforce that resume with a win against the Ducks, that would help, but obviously a clear-cut NCAA tourney team. We cannot say that about the 3 seed, and I think that's really interesting here, Jeff. I mean, Iowa went into the final weekend of the year in first place in the Big Ten. As you mentioned, got swept by Oregon. As a result, they dropped down to that 3 seed, but they've got some work to do here to make it into the NCAA tourney. You saw Iowa, as you said, this weekend. What do you make of the Hawks as they head into the postseason here?
Yeah, they're a really interesting team because they were a number 1 team in the Big Ten Conference for most of the season. But the RPI is doing them no favors, a little bit lower RPI on the season that's hurting them. I think they probably have a little bit of work to do in the Big Ten tournament. It would be huge for them. They need to get out of their pool, right? If they can win their pool, that's going to go a long ways for them. This Iowa team is kind of a traditional Big Ten type team. They pitch it really well. They play really good defense. They don't have a ton of power at the plate, but 1 through 9, they hit for batting average, and they just manufacture runs. And I think in talking to Coach Heller, even they get compliments and praise on how they play the game. They play hard. They play the right way. They're a really tight-knit team. They faltered down the stretch a little bit. The bullpens let them down. The bullpen was a strength for Iowa throughout the entire season until the last couple weeks. So really, Iowa they need to get the bullpen going again. They need good outings from their starting pitching. And usually Charles Schwab Field plays big here in Omaha, so that could be an advantage to Iowa and how they're built and how they play.
You mentioned that RPI. They're 73rd in the RPI as of this morning. And just to give people a little context on what that number means, no Big Ten team has made it as an at-large with an RPI of 60 or worse in the last 3 years. So obviously the best thing you can do is win the Big Ten tourney because then you get an automatic bid. But either way, to your point, probably some work to do for the Hawkeyes. What about USC? They are the 4th seed, so that means they get the toughest pool of the 4 top seeds. But they've been a really good story this year, a program that, of course, has so much great history, looking to return to prominence.
Yeah, you talk about the USC tradition. They're built on winning. They played Washington in a weekend series this past weekend at Washington and dropped 2 out of 3 to the Huskies. And Washington is in their pool, right? So that's the 4-5. You've got USC as the 4, Washington as the 5, and that's going to be a tough pool, right? Anybody could come out of that. It's a USC team that is really good all the way around. Again, they hit for high average. They can pitch it. You talk about like Ethan Hedges is a great 2-way player, leads the team in hitting, is also their closer, and just a really dynamic player for USC. So USC is a team that they could absolutely make a run. They're probably a regional team as well. They're probably in, but you don't want to take anything for granted. And USC for sure feels like they got to take it day by day and got to keep winning games. A
program with 12 NCAA titles, most all time, but have not been to the NCAA tournament in 10 years. To your point, it feels like they're on the right side of the bubble here for sure, but it wouldn't hurt to make a little noise here in Omaha.
Everybody's still trying to build the resume, right?
Exactly.
Everybody's still trying to do work, and you don't want to leave anything to chance. So you feel like USC is a team that should be in and will be in, but again, you can see the RPI of 41, and that's a team that has a very solid resume and should be in the postseason.
5 Quad 1 wins this year for them. Other teams you might have your eye on as we head into this week?
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State's an interesting one, right? They're always a team that's dangerous with Joseph Giroux on the mound, is probably the top pitcher in the conference. So it's a team that could upset somebody and advance potentially to pool play. And they're in the pool with Oregon and Nebraska. And to me, you look at that for Nebraska, that's probably the toughest draw of every team, because more than likely they're facing Giroux in their first game, and then they've got to come back and play and beat the number 1 seed in Oregon. And again, for any of these teams that are not the top seed in their pool, they have to go 2-0, right? So Nebraska's going to have to beat Iowa, and they're going to have to beat Oregon to come out. So a really tough draw for them. But Michigan State's an interesting team, right? They sneak in as a 12 seed, and they could do damage. They're a dangerous team. And then again, like I think Iowa's interesting. Again, if they've been so good all year long, if they can pitch it and they can play defense, they could make a run. So it's going to be a fun tournament, right? I mean, usually it's not the favorite that wins it, right? And a lot of times that you're going to get a surprise or two. That could certainly happen. I think on paper you look at it, and even the eyeball test tells you that Oregon's the best team. But they're going to have to play good baseball, and they're going to have to stay hot.
Well, we saw Michigan make a run in the softball. It'll be interesting to see if there's a similar storyline in baseball. You just never know. It's the beauty of the postseason. Jeff Lisey, great stuff. Really looking forward to the coverage coming up here all week on the Big Ten Network. Thanks for your time, Jeff.
Love it. Thanks for having me on.
You can see the entire 2025 Big Ten baseball tournament presented by IFS.AI. Live coverage begins tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Softball, a couple weeks ahead of baseball. Remember, 8 teams made it to the NCAA tourney. Social media reflecting the drama of the weekend. There was a lot of it. 3 teams ended up making it through. Oregon and UCLA, which both hosted regionals, and Nebraska went on the road and captured the Baton Rouge Regional. Those are our Gatorade game leaders. For more on what happened and what is next as those 3 head to Super Regionals, here's Sammy Netlin.
Let's start with Nebraska. The Huskers powered through the Baton Rouge Regional, collecting 3 run rules powered by no one else other than National Player of the Year finalist Jordy Ball. The junior for the Huskers went 5 for 5 with 4 home runs and 7 walks, getting on base every single at-bat this weekend. In the circle, may have only had 181 pitches, but boy, did she make them count, only surrendering 2 hits and a single earned run. The Huskers and Jordy Ball will face off against Tennessee in the Super Regional round, and the nation's best pitching staff, led by ace Carlin Pickens. The staff has a 1.76 ERA. The key for the Huskers is going to be, can their bats be on time for the velocity that they will see in Knoxville? Pickens can top 70 consistently. They need to be short to contact and play solid D behind Ball in the circle, and that will be their ticket to Oklahoma City. Moving on to UCLA, the Bruins had a similar regional weekend that was powered by 3 run rules. That brings their total for the season up to 26, which is a program record. They were led at the plate by Clements, Grant, and Woolery, all of which who had 2 home runs apiece across their 3 regional games, bringing Woolery and Grant's total RBI record to 161 on the season. That is the most of any Bruin duo in program history. In the circle, they were led once again by their veteran aces, Terry and Tinsley. As we look ahead to their super regional matchup in Columbia, as they'll face the South Carolina Gamecocks, they will once again be leaning on Terry and Tinsley, as well as their freshman ace, Addison Fisher, who we did not see yet in the regional weekend. The Bruins are rested, they are ready to go, and I like their chances against the Gamecocks when the bats are powering and firing on all cylinders like we saw in the regional weekend. Lastly, let's talk about our Big Ten regular season champion, Oregon Ducks. The Oregon Ducks had a much different regional weekend than the Bruins and the Huskers because they had to scratch and claw their way through the losers bracket, having to win 2 games against the Stanford Cardinal on Sunday. They were led offensively by none other than the speedy Luchar sisters, and in the circle, they got some key innings in the bullpen from Chambers and Sokolsky. Looking ahead, they have one of the most interesting super regional matchups because they will face the Liberty Flames, who had arguably the most exciting regional weekend, knocking off the overall #1 seed Texas A&M Aggies for the first time in NCAA softball history. The key for the Ducks this weekend going into Super Regionals is to get their speed game going early. If they can score first and if they can keep the Liberty Flames on their heels, I like their chances to punch their ticket to Oklahoma City.
The Big Ten comprising fully half of the men's lacrosse Final Four. Maryland took down Georgetown 9-6 to advance to the national semis for the 30th time. They get Syracuse on Saturday, and Penn State used an 8-0 scoring run to rally from a 6-goal deficit and top two-time defending national champ Notre Dame. Nittany Lions will play top seed Cornell, who they beat earlier this year in the Final Four. It's their third all-time, all under coach Jeff Tambroni. The Northwestern women on to the Final Four as well, the 16th all-time for the 8-time national champs. Tough matchup in Massachusetts with a BC team that beat them in the title game last season. It is time to talk some spring football, and who better to do that than my good friend Jerry DiNardo, who joins me now. And Coach, we're going to look back on the spring, get some reflections from you as we head into the summer months. And I want to start just kind of big picture with what's been going on with spring games. It's certainly a lot different than when you coached. Although Ohio State kind of going at it a little bit more traditionally, what did you take from watching the defending national champs?
There's certainly a lot of versions of spring games, and I think it's like everything else in college football, we're evolving. Ohio State chose to keep the first team together and the second team separate from the first team. The first team was not live, so there was no tackling when the first team defense was going against the first team offense. When twos were on twos, there was full contact. So that's the version that Ryan Day wanted to do. And I think, River, a lot of this has to do, as I look back at all the spring games, on where you are at the quarterback position. And Ryan Day made it really clear that the spring game was going to be a major part of the quarterback evaluation. I thought Julian Sayin looked the best in the amount of time he was there. Tavian St. Clair, the young freshman, I'm not sure he's going to compete right away all the way through the end, but man, is he a talented player. And the reason you want to keep the ones together, and I think most coaches would agree, if you're in a quarterback competition and you divide the team up equally, then you're not always throwing to the same wide receivers. You might have half an offensive line that'll wind up being in the twos, so you have the issue with pressure against the quarterback. So to me, it's all based on where your team is, and obviously Ryan Day knows where his team is, and this was the best format. It was a competitive game, and the fact that a first-time starter would have started in front of thousands of people before the Texas game, I think was another reason why Ryan Day set the spring game up the way he did.
Well, it helps with whoever the starter is, and Lincoln Kienholz is certainly very much in that battle as well. They'll have Jeremiah Smith to throw to, which is a nice little advantage. Cardell Tate as well, really just a talented receiver group. You mentioned they open against Texas, Jerry. And look, in this day and age, I mean, you can lose a game like that. It's certainly not going to hurt you in terms of getting the playoff, or it could be overcome anyway. But do you like starting with a game with that kind of magnitude, Ohio State, Texas?
I wouldn't like it every year, but I think this is almost a perfect game for Ohio State. Ohio State's goal is going to be to win the national championship. That's their goal every year. They won it last year. At some point, you have to fight complacency when you're coming off a season like Ohio State had last year. They played Texas not too long ago. Ryan Day doesn't have to convince them that whoever plays better in this game is probably going to win. There's no talent discrepancy. And so for me, it impacts your camp. It intensifies your camp. You get your players' attention. Would I want to play Texas every year? First game, no. But in this situation, I think it's a perfect game. Of course, I'm not Ryan Day. I think it's a perfect game for Texas.
Two new coordinators. You got Chip Kelly going to the NFL and Jim Knowles, of course, going to Penn State. What do you make of the replacements and the challenge ahead for them?
Yeah, this is really interesting and really challenging. Brian Hartline, wide receiver coach, and he has had the title of co-offensive coordinator. So he's been in the background making some decisions about game plans, I'm sure. But Chip Kelly, one of the finest play callers in all of college football, Brian Hartline will be a first-time play caller. And Rev, you've heard me say this over and over again. The toughest job in college football is calling plays on offense on game day. Harder than the job that the head coach has. The head coach can't make a game management mistake, but down in and down out, it's not the defensive coordinator, it's the offensive coordinator. Ryan Day's been a long-time play caller. How him and Brian Hartline interact will certainly be interesting. The other interesting part of this is, as you know, when we go out in the summer going to different camps, there's an inside drill at every practice, 9-on-7, whatever you want to call it. And that's everybody but the wide receivers. I don't know many play callers that don't attend that drill. Most play callers might be someone that would be at that drill. When you're the wide receiver coach, you're usually with the wide receivers during that inside drill. But you're allowed unlimited coaches now, so there's no doubt that I'm guessing Brian Hartline will be at the inside drill because that's where he'll get a feel for the run game. And as a play caller, you obviously have to have a feel for the run game. The other interesting thing is the graduate assistant, the analyst, former quarterback Fessler is the analyst that has been coaching the quarterbacks the last couple of years. And so you have a young coach coaching the quarterbacks. You have a first-time play caller in Brian Hartline. But obviously you have Ryan Day, who was a play caller from way back. And he, I'm guessing, will be more involved perhaps than he was with Chip a year ago.
Well, a team that hopes to be this year's Ohio State, Jerry, is Penn State. Kind of a similar model. They had a number of guys who could have gone pro, who opted to come back. They broke through last year and made it to the playoff. Drew Aller kind of first and foremost among those players who came back, and I know you're going to be watching him really closely this year. Tell me why.
I think where Penn State has to go is when you look at Drew's numbers in ranked teams and unranked teams in preseason and postseason, you're looking at it there. There's a drastic difference. Now, in fairness to Drew Aller, the numbers are always going to go down in postseason. The numbers are always going to go down when you play ranked opponents. I mean, this isn't unusual. What has to happen here is the gap has to be closed down a little bit because a lot of those numbers in the regular season, because of Andy Kotelicki's offensive coordinator, because of his style, there's going to be a bunch of completions. So Nick Singleton is the leading returning receiver on Penn State's team. So a lot of Drew Aller's passes are short passes. They're simple passes. They're against teams that they have better talent than. It's only in the postseason where you really have to say, as you're game planning against a team like Penn State, can the quarterback beat us? I mean, that's how you start a defensive game plan. And so far, Drew Aller has done that in most of his games, but he needs to do it in the postseason, and he needs to do it against the ranked opponents.
And part of it, frankly, is having better receivers, and they have better receivers this year. They went and got Kyron Hudson in the portal, Trevor Pena from Syracuse as well. What do you make of the schedule? They do have to go to Columbus, and we know Ohio State's been a thorn in their side for sure.
I think this is a great schedule. I mean, if you look at non-conference, Nevada, FIU, Villanova, I mean, obviously they're going to be more talented than all those teams. They'll be as talented, if not more talented than most of the teams. But, you pick the highlights. There's no Michigan team on the schedule. I think it's a great schedule. I think they will match up with everybody. Again, I think a lot of it's going to depend on the quarterback. When the defensive coordinator game plan, they're going to say, can Drew Aller beat us? And if the answer is yes, that's going to make an impact on the defensive coordinator.
And you'd like to say, hey, is this the year they break through and beat Ohio State? But the truth of the matter is Ohio State showed us last year, you don't have to fixate on these regular season games in order to win a national championship, with them losing to Michigan and still going on to win it all. Lots more from Jerry coming up as we continue to look through some of the good spring storylines. We'll take a deep dive on the other two playoff teams from a year ago, Oregon and Indiana's Big Ten Today rolls on. Track and field, the men of Oregon captured the outdoor Big Ten title, adding to their indoor crown. They won 13 of the 21 events against a field that included 5 top 20 teams, 23rd all-time outdoor conference title. The USC women put together quite a rally. They started yesterday in 9th place, but they had a dominant day and captured the conference championship. 7 USC athletes won individual titles. Elise Woodward got the reaction from both champs.
Yeah, Quincy's had a lot of good moments here in Hayward Field, and you add another one to it, a Big Ten outdoor championship for your women's team. What stands out to you about how you were able to get this done?
Well, just their fight all day, and we had some hiccups here and there, but the women, they just competed at another level, and they have great character, and they rose to the challenge. I'm just so proud of them. They deserve it. I'm just so happy for them and USC and to bring our interest into the Big Ten and to win a championship outdoors. It's a great feeling. I'm just so happy for our women.
Were you nervous heading down to that last race? You knew that you had to, really put on a show to get it done.
Absolutely not. No nerves at all. Absolutely not. Oh, my God. I had my head down and my palms were sweaty. And I just wanted to hold on to the baton. Don't drop the baton. So, anything can happen in the relay. Very nervous moment. But I have faith in these women, so just proud of them.
Super proud of the team. I think on paper we had some work to do coming into the meet, and the men really stepped up, and they all took their roles very seriously. They were focused all weekend, and they were engaged in the competition, and it shows what happens when you behave like that.
It was such a strong field that you guys were coming into, and like you said, you had a lot of work to do. Was there anything you felt was the turning point of this meet for the Ducks?
I don't know if there was an exact turning point. They just kept coming, They just, every event, it's like, what do we need to do? And obviously it's do your best you can and use all your preparation. But, they were solid across the board. In every event that we towed the line in or jumped or threw in, they were ready to go, and they did a great job.
From Oregon track to Oregon football, which occasionally resembles a track meet, Jerry is back with me. Oregon's so good last year, Coach, #1 for much of the year. Got a tough scheduling break in the playoff, to say the least, having to face Ohio State. But this is a team that had a lot of personnel turnover from a season ago. What are the headlines for you coming out of the spring for them?
Yeah, and again, to start with the spring game, I was watching Big Ten today before their spring game, and Coach Lanning made it very clear that this was going to be physical, it was going to be hard-nosed, it was going to be tackle football. And I don't know if he was talking to some of the coaches that have decided to back off on the spring game, but he certainly wanted it to be real football. The quarterbacks were not live on the day of the spring game, but during spring practice at times, Dan Lanning said you can tackle a quarterback. And again, with quarterbacks that haven't had a lot of experience, if you don't make them live at some point, meaning the defense can pressure and sack you, the first game, the quarterback could be looking at the rush more than they look at the secondary because they haven't had to worry about the rush during spring practice. But anyway, it was a terrific spring game. It was a great event in the stadium. Non-conference schedule. Oregon State, I think a conference team that has a non-conference rivalry always has a little bit more difficult of a schedule, and Oregon's one of those teams, as is Washington and Washington State. But the schedule's good. They'll be favored in most of it. There's no Ohio State and no Michigan. So they come out of spring practice pretty healthy. All but 3 incoming freshmen were at spring practice. When you talk about the portal and you talk about mid-semester high school guys going, that's one of the major changes in recent years, that you could have everyone but 3 freshmen at spring practice.
See Oklahoma State in there as well in the non-conference, so a couple challenging games for the Ducks outside of the Big Ten. Let's get to Indiana, Coach. They were, I think, in some ways the story of the year in college football, certainly the story of the year in the regular season in college football last year. I'm going to go from 1-8 in the Big Ten to 8-1. We talked about it as the program that had lost the most games in the history of major college football, and here they were in the college football playoff in Curt Cignetti's first year. So now it begs the question, what do you do for an encore, and how do you maintain this level?
Well, first thing you do is you thank Scott Dolson, the athletic director, for the non-conference schedule. Non-conference, Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State. When you look at previous years, that non-conference schedule has been too difficult. Now, you might say, maybe they went a little too far, but better to be where they are than back in the day when there was some really tough non-conference games. And how about this? If you look at the conference schedule, and Coach Cignetti gets all the credit for this. When you look at the conference schedule, I suggest here there'll be more matchup opponent games on that conference schedule than there has been in years. What Coach Cignetti has said is when we played the best teams in the conference, things changed. And the way he addressed that was in the portal, both at quarterback and in the offensive line.
No doubt. The offensive line, I think, is a major area of concern for them. They got Pat Coogan from Notre Dame, who is a really good player. But to your point, like against the best teams last year, it felt like the line of scrimmage was the biggest challenge for them. And we'll see whether or not they can reinforce that this year. I think where it's really interesting, Jerry, and this is not in any way to diminish what I think, frankly, was one of the most remarkable seasons that I've ever seen in college football, given where they started. But in this transfer portal era, when you're coming from a program like Curt Cignetti was at James Madison, he had seen all of these James Madison guys not only practice but play for years. He knew who the best guys were. It's a little more challenging now in the portal when you're working like everyone else, which is kind of speed dating, as coaches have said. What do you make, at least on paper, of what they did in terms of a portal haul here?
Well, they addressed the need at quarterback, right? Fernando Mendoza coming from Cal. And this is really interesting. They had to address the quarterback position, and they had to address the offensive line. Coincidentally, Mendoza was under tremendous pressure at Cal last year. And he was sacked too many times. He was scrambling too many times. And then you speed ahead to this year. Indiana's offensive line in the portal has to be strong enough where Mendoza doesn't feel the same way, because a quarterback that's sacked too much is very rarely a good quarterback, because the eyes stop going downfield and the eyes start going to the rush. They start to scramble too soon because they don't want to get sacked. So the way that Coach Cignetti has addressed this, in my opinion, is he has tied the quarterback and the offensive line and saying that's where we have to improve. Not so much a quarterback, because last year they had good quarterback play, but especially at the line of scrimmage. If we're going to look like Indiana throughout the entire season, and there's no difference when we play the best teams on our schedule, we have to get it better at the offensive line. Coach Cignetti has certainly been entertaining in a lot of things that he has said, but he also just hits right on what they have to do to keep going and improve. And he always gives you a clear picture what they have done well last year and what they need to do better this coming year.
Didn't beat a ranked team last year, so that's kind of the next step. Do you start to beat some of the truly elite teams in the league? But man, I mean, just an amazing story. It's amazing we're talking about Indiana in this context. If you would have said this a year ago, I think we both would have thought, no way. But just an incredible job. And how does he follow it up? How do we follow up what we just did? Well, we're going to talk more football, from those who made the playoff to those looking to break through. We'll dive into Brett Bielema's Illini, Dylan Raiola and the Huskers. More spring takeaways with Jerry coming up. Illinois announcing a new contract for head football coach Brett Bielema last week. Bielema entering year 5 with the Illini. He took over a program that was really struggling, but they've won 28 games in his 4 years, including 10 last season, just the 5th 10-win season in school history. The new deal takes him through 2031. He'll make just under $8 million in year 1 of the deal. And Jerry, a guy we have known for a long time, a ton back from last year. I mean, they really did an incredible job in the offseason of keeping players, many of whom would have had a chance to go to the NFL. And on top of that, Coach, they've got a schedule which I think gives them a chance to be this year's Indiana.
Yeah, no doubt. You mentioned the top 2 things, right? Most of the team is back from a 10-win season. Schedule 3 teams from the Old West: Purdue, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. 2 teams from the Old East: Rutgers and Maryland. Non-con: Western Illinois, Duke, and Western Michigan. That's really good news. The bad news is the players are back in their dorms and their apartments. They're looking at this thing just like we are and saying, wow, we got a lot of games that we're better. We match up here. And so a veteran coach like Brett Bielema, who's been through this probably more than once when he was at Wisconsin, where he's coming off a big year, and the following year the schedule isn't as challenging maybe as some previous schedules. So the good news is this, as you said, Rever, it's a great schedule it lays out. The challenges, players, it's game at a time, and I think Brett, we've been around him a lot. He's that kind of guy anyway. Don't look at the score. It's the next play. It's the process, so on and so forth. But certainly a lot to be excited about if you're an Illinois fan.
Absolutely. And I think you look at last year and you say, yes, they won 10 games, but they also went 5-0 in games decided by 7 points or fewer. So there were a lot of games that could have gone either way that they had the good fortune to win. And so, again, I think if you're trying to remind players of what could happen, maybe you harp on that a little bit. But, man, the continuity of the players is great, and the continuity of the coaching staff is really good too, Jerry, including the coordinators.
I want to say there's 3 teams in the conference that have the head coach back and both coordinators. And Illinois is one of those teams. Oregon's another one. But when you look with Altmaier coming back, veteran quarterback, you have Barry Lunny as the offensive coordinator. He's coming back. And you have Aaron Henry, who I think has made tremendous growth in the 2 years he's been defensive coordinator. And I think obviously his mentor is also his boss. And I think Brett has shared a lot of his philosophy with Aaron on the defensive side of the ball. So again, you've got the contract, you've got the coordinators back, and you have a tremendous quarterback coming back, and you have a manageable schedule. And I think that's why a lot of people are saying Illinois, if they perform the way they're capable of, they very well could be a playoff team.
Yeah, it should be a really fun year in Champaign. I want to touch on Nebraska as well. They had that breakthrough last year where they got to a bowl game. They faltered a little bit at the end of the season, but they figured out a way to get there. And I feel like now you've got that monkey off your back, and now you can move forward and be the program that Nebraska fans so desperately want them to be, the program that they were for so many years. It's interesting. We've been talking a lot about this spring football and how you handle it. Matt Rule was really outspoken about how he went about it, canceling the traditional spring game. What do you make of kind of how upfront Matt Rule was with all this?
Well, I've thought spring practice would have already left college football. I mean, I've been saying this for 4 or 5 years. I don't think that the spring practice and the spring games are all that important nowadays. And Matt Rule has taken a different position, right? He has the Husky games now. They're not tackling on the day of the spring game. He did tweak it a little bit. His first comment, I think it's very accurate, that other teams, because of the portal, could scout the players on our team that have not been on game film. And that was a legitimate argument. Then he kind of tweaked it a little bit and said, you know what? If we have the roster limitations that might be coming down, I want to give the players who haven't played on tape a chance perhaps to help themselves go somewhere else if they want to leave. So you have all these cutting edge thoughts about spring practice and the spring games. You look at OTAs, organized team activities that the NFL has. That might be a way that the college game's going. And then on the other hand, you look at Ryan Day and Dan Lanning, and they say no, they want to have this spring game. So obviously, you don't have to have one if you don't want to. I think the question for me in Nebraska is, now that they've changed offensive coordinator and you have Dana Holgorsen calling the plays, is this going to be the same type of transition that Wisconsin is going to go through this year? When you think of Nebraska, are they a passing team or are they a running team? You look at the numbers, even if they're 50-50, they still have to be one or the other. They have to hang their hat on one or the other. We've seen Wisconsin, which we might talk about here in a little bit. We've seen them try to be more balanced and not really hang their hat on the run game, but hang their hat on the air raid and trying to be balanced. So I wonder where Nebraska offensively is going. It seems to me they might be going the same place that Wisconsin is leaving.
And we know their defense has been really good these last couple of years. They do have a new defensive coordinator, John Butler, replacing Tony White, so we'll see how that goes. But the offense, clearly, to your point, needs to get better. The dramatic conclusion of our show is coming up next, including some more action from the weekend. Washington rowing with a historic performance in Indy. We got the details coming up. Big news this morning. Jordy Ball, the great Nebraska star, is one of the 3 finalists for the USA Softball Collegiate Player of the Year, the first Husker ever to be named a top 3 finalist. Ball, of course, the Big Ten Player and Pitcher of the Year, the first ever to do that. The Washington women's rowing team, with a performance for the ages, sweeping all 7 grand finals this weekend, captured the Big Ten crown in Indy. They're just the second team ever to do that in the 25-year history of the Big Ten regatta. It was the 27th conference championship in program history, obviously first in the Big Ten. The victorious coach, Yasmin Farouk, with Caroline Hendershot.
Here with head coach Yas Farouk, the newest Big Ten champion. You were just telling me you were shaking. How are you feeling right now?
Oh my gosh, like this place is so emotional for me because in 2019, and you were there, that's when we swept the national championship and haven't been back here since. And that race had me on pins and needles, just like this one. In 2019, Caroline was in the Michigan varsity 8 that led for 1,800 meters. And I told my team today, I said, keep an eye on Michigan. They're always a sleeper in the final. You got to be ready for them to just go for it. And they kept us all honest today.
That first varsity 8 really coming down to the line. You were saying it wasn't lost on you, knowing that you guys had to get second or higher to win the championship. So what was going through your mind as it was coming down to the wire?
Well, first of all, I was thinking, catch Michigan, right? And then Rutgers had been so strong in every race up to the varsity 8 final. And varsity 8's always the tightest one. Like, you come in knowing that. And I knew that we'd be pressed by both of those boats. So when we got level with Michigan, I was starting to feel a little bit better about it. But then here came Rutgers, and then it was just, a race through the last 250 that had us all on pins and needles. It means a lot to me personally because I grew up a Badger, right? So I grew up in the Big Ten. The Big Ten's always been so special to me. So this is our new conference, and we feel very lucky and grateful to be in this conference, honestly, for all of our sports teams, and to be able to win the first Big Ten championship for Washington in the sport of rowing. Like, I think for Rowtown, USA, I couldn't ask for anything more.
Let's wrap things up now with Jerry, and we'll start with Washington. While we're on the topic, pretty interesting, we've been talking about spring game formats and whatnot. I mean, Jedd Fisch, not only did they play a spring game and it was open to the public, every practice all spring was open to the public, so a really different approach there. What are your thoughts on the Huskies as they head into year 2 under Fisch?
And remember, they also had the women's soccer team and the men's soccer team represented, kicking a couple field goals. It was a lot of fun to watch. I think the highlights about Washington are a couple things. 60 of the 85 scholarships that they'll have this year played for Jedd Fisch either at Arizona or at Washington. Usually a second-year coach doesn't have that many players that he has coached. Quarterback position, I think they're going to be solid. Jedd is a big quarterback guy. He coaches the quarterbacks. Overall, a year ago, they had 7 offensive linemen in spring practice. This year, they had 16. I thought watching them on the Big Ten Network, this is a good-looking team. I love what Jedd Fisch is doing at Washington.
Yeah, Ryan Walters running the defense, too, and we know how good he has been, certainly in his time at Illinois as a defensive coordinator. Finally, Wisconsin, and we saw the streak of 22 straight winning seasons come to an end last year, now trying to get back into bowl contention under Luke Fickell. And man, you talk a lot about schedules. This is a tough schedule, Jerry.
One of the toughest schedules in the country. And when we were at camp last year, I can remember Luke Fickell telling us our offensive line wants to do more than they did the first year in the air raid offense. And I think what's happened now is that they are tweaking the offense. And Luke has made it clear they're not going back to the offense that they used in the Big Ten West. And it's not about being balanced because they were balanced a year ago. What it's about is if you look at the Wisconsin team going forward from 25 on, it is going to be a physical football team. It's not necessarily the plays that you call, it's your identity. They were hurt on defense last year because they weren't physical enough offensively. And again, it's not run pass balance. It's how you see yourself, and they want to see themselves as a team that wins games at the line of scrimmage, whether it's run or pass, but mostly run. So you're going to see somewhere in between the air raid offense and the old Big Ten West I formation offense.
Oh, cannot wait to see it. Jeff Grimes, a new offensive coordinator. Obviously, Billy Edwards brought in at quarterback. It's not going to be easy. 3 of the 4 playoff teams from the Big Ten from last year on their schedule. Great stuff, Coach. Fun to visit with you. We'll see you next time on Big Ten Today.